Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is David Novak. So today I finished reading Ned Blackhawk's The Rediscovery of America. I have been finding it the hardest title to remember. I keep thinking it's the Undiscovery or the Revisioning, but it is the Rediscovery of America. I finished it and I liked it very much. And I would like to read a little bit from it. I've talked about how in the future, next year possibly, I would like to read Francis Parkman. What is it called? France and England in North America. And they are, even for Library of America standards, they are fairly thick books. Well, of course, I expected that Blackhawk would have to mention Parkman. And early on, there was a mention to the effect that Parkman viewed Indians or Native Americans or indigenous peoples as stupid. And that was all he said. Lo and behold, at the beginning of chapter 11, he talks more about Parkman. The book has 12 chapters. The last chapter covers basically from the 1950s until the 1990s, times that I was living through, and I found it hard to follow, hard to understand. There were so many agencies and acronyms that I just could not keep track of what was going on. But other than that, the first 11 chapters were really helped my synthesis of American history. And I thought that what he had to say about Parkman and others really delivered on my expectations for the book. This really, I think, set the ground for me to tackle Parkman in the future, if I do. It's certainly not a sure thing, but I would like to read some paragraphs from that. Across the United States, mythological visions of history gained currency. Everywhere, citizens celebrated the origins of the Republic and equated its history with progress, if not providence. Even the nation's first trained historians shared Kraft's truisms. They, too, located the defining characteristics of U.S. history in the colonial era and believed that the conquest of Indian lands formed the basis of America's historical fulfillment. Ironically, in the world's first constitutional democracy, settlements far away from the state defined the American experience. Most notably, Francis Parkman and Frederick Jackson Turner offered visions of frontier societies and the indigenous obstacles that had stood in their way. Parkman's 7-volume history of France in the New World, as he initially termed it, was the most thorough attempt to fashion a history of Anglo-American distinctiveness. It did so through a vilification of indigenous actors and their French allies, whose loyalties to feudalism, monarchy, and Rome hindered North America's destiny. Similarly, Turner offered an explanatory thesis on the significance of the frontier in American history. Delivered in Chicago during the Columbian Exhibition, it argues that the colonization of interior lands transformed settlers into self-governing citizens, thereby forming the headwaters of American democracy. His less famous dissertation had examined the first institution of Euro-American economy, the trading post, which made the Indian dependent on the white man's supplies. For Turner, despite centuries of indigenous adaptation across the Great Lakes, small interior trading posts prepared native nations for an inevitable disappearance. The stage of civilization that could make a gun and gunpowder was too far above the bow and arrow to be reached by the Indian. Parkman's, Turner's, and Kraft's new orthodoxies hardened at the dawn of the 20th century as scholars and religious, civic, and state leaders celebrated visions of U.S. history. In a morality play with foregone conclusions, the United States emerged from the conquest of Indian lands and achieved its destiny through continental expansion. A consciousness of the American interior fueled not only the nation's historical production, but also its scholarly infrastructure. The Mississippi Valley Historical Association formed in 1907 and began its journal in 1914, creating the antecedents for the Organization of American Historians and the Journal of American History. Within such studies, Indians were not simply outside of American civilization, but antithetical to it. They remained naturalized in another time and represented the obverse to the nation's fulfillment. It is only from the study of barbarous and partially cultivated nations that we are able to comprehend man as a progressive being, summarized Hubert Howe Bancroft in his 5-volume series, The Native Races. From Iroquois to Alaska, scholars sought to identify how indigenous peoples differed from civilized man. Despite differences between them, all native peoples shared commonalities below those of progressive man. As Bancroft detailed, among the Alutiiq of Kodiak Island, their domestic manners are of the lowest order. They have no idea of morality and live simply in filth. On the scale of white supremacy, native peoples inhabited the lowest rungs of humanity. They remained members of a vanishing race in need of reform. Like the nation, they too shared in a destiny. If they could not reform, they were destined to disappear. The new century was dawning, but native people still inhabited the twilight of the past. This vision of history reached into all corners of America. It became so ubiquitous that it inspired endless commemorations and also national holidays, first celebrating Thanksgiving and then Columbus himself. From school books to monuments, within advertisements to the earliest motion pictures, an endless stream of historical production flowed across the nation. In a remarkable fusion, Native Americans became viewed as both noble and savage. I will leave it there. That's probably about a page of the text. Just really marvelous. That was everything I hoped for. Now, I grew up under all of that propaganda, conscious or unconscious, as it were. And that may indeed be why it has taken me so long into my 60s to finally be breaking into this topic. And so I think he has really set the framework for this American classic. It will give me, hopefully, a proper lens if I do decide to tackle Parkman. I definitely urge and encourage you to check out the Ned Blackhawk book. His book was recommended to me by one of my viewers on a video that I posted about a different book that I was unable to make headway into, and he kindly recommended this book, and I say he, but I'm not quite sure it's a he or not, possibly a she. That viewer, however, did me a great favor, and so I want to say thank you. This, again, does not constitute a review of Blackhawk's book, but gives you some of my just most immediate feelings upon completion of the book. Thank you for stopping by my channel.